So, so in the Mars chocolate business, if you sort of looked at the brands, because it's a category that the leading brands drive disproportionate share. So,
Oh, is that right? Yeah, okay.
so the way and beverages is the same, which is if you said how big's the market leader, if you've got a brand in the top five, the top 10. So if you sort of took the chocolate market globally, if you had three brands in the top five and one was block chocolate, you'd probably be market leader with a 30 to 40 share. You'd have a portfolio, but the leading brands is what took you there. If you didn't have block in that 3 to 5, and you had, let's say, an M&M's or a Snickers, and you'd probably be somewhere between 18 and 25 share. So what Mars tried to do was, how do we drive a global consistency of brands? And so part of the challenge is, if you have a corporate head office, is how do you connect between the operating business and the marketing approach? So
Yeah.
the the approach at the time, and it goes back to this was in place earlier, was they appointed brand strategic leaders. And so there was a brand strategic leader of Snickers, Twix, M&M's, and Dove Galaxy. And so those brands had to drive a consistency. So they came to me while I was running Australia and said, would I take that on as additional responsibility, and would I do M&M's? And I said, I'd be up for it if you gave me Snickers.
Oh,
And
did you?
and the reason that I answered that was the US business dominated M&M's, and I thought, you're just not going to influence the agenda by being in Australia with a small part of the business and time zone. Where if you gave me Snickers, it was truly a multi-market brand. And so when you then got that job, because I had come from a market, I sort of had a reverse view of how the role should work, which is not, I'm the brand strategic leader, and then here's where the market sits, and I sort of just reversed it and said, okay, the markets are my customers. So I'm sold in 80 plus markets. I've got 12 markets that deliver 80% of my business. And then my role with a full-time brand director is to provide clarity and support to drive the strategic agenda. So under that remit, if I come to a country and say, this is what we want you to do, navigating buy-in and getting people aligned is not that easy in global organizations. So,
Mm.
and this was partly what I learnt of working for John at Arnott, was I did a survey that tried to understand what they wanted and didn't want from the role. So they were, strangely enough, they said they wanted more structure and clarity. What they didn't want was, they didn't want me to do any global sponsorships. So they didn't want World Cup or Olympics or stuff where they got cross-charged from an impact and an efficiency.
Yeah, okay.
And then what's the priorities of you're trying to do in the local market? And then I just came back with a remit, which is, here's what you're telling me you want done. And then I went and enforced that. So, and in enforcing it,
Interesting word.
yeah, if you try and come in and say, this is what you need to do. So I try to flip it to inspiration. If I give you inspiration. And so the first part was having alignment on the global positioning and the brand story. And I ran a workshop in London where there were two camps of what the view was. And there was sort of like the developed world and the developing. And I did this exercise, which was stand in the room at your different spots. And I said, now, you're to put forward not your own view, you're to put forward why you believe the opposite view could be correct. Because I'm trying to create an openness and a dialogue. So the team that was in the develop, they said, well, if we were in the developing world, this is why we would believe this to be true. So they had to argue. When it got to the guys from the developing markets, they said, we can't imagine how we could ever argue what they're saying. So what I sort of went through, which again was a bit of development journey along, was how to go fast, how to go slow to go fast. And so I did this exercise, which was, we're going to go around and talk to young men around the world just to get a sense of consistency of how they operate in groups and the role of confectionery in their life. Now, we went to Saudi Arabia, Korea, Australia. It was the same. Now, in Saudi Arabia, they couldn't go to a shopping centre as a group because they have to go with parents. But belonging to a group and belonging to mates had the same meaning. And in Russia, there was in the research, there was this line, which was, he's a jerk, but he's our jerk, which is, we can poke fun at him, but we wouldn't let other people do it.
Yep.
So then when we did that exercise, the fundamental human needs are the same. The responsiveness to stories and positionings are the same. And, I had a few of the markets come up to me in that process to apologize about, I was at this position, I changed this position. And what I did in that going slow to go fast is I accepted that I had to invite dissent, because if you don't invite dissent, you don't really have people's buy-in. They just go away and do their own crap anyway. So what I did when I lined it up, I then just said, okay, what's the yes you don't mean, and what's the no you're delaying? And that's what led to that immersion work with the consumers by market and the apology. And then we aligned on positioning, we aligned on communication, and then we rolled the first campaign out against that was an ad for the US Super Bowl with Betty White. And it was, you're not you when you're hungry. And it basically showed,
Say that again.
you're not you when you're hungry.
Yep.
And what the ad showed was she was playing gridiron, and it was Mike, and Mike's plays like an old woman, plays like Betty White when he's hungry, and then the transformation of having. So we then rolled that campaign out to 70 markets. The brand went from single-digit growth to double-digit growth, and just unlocked, like, doubled the brand in 4 or 5 years on a brand that was already 70 plus years of age. So, I would say what I think I did particularly well was how to navigate a global organization in a change program and inspiration to enforce an outcome, but do it through dissent, do it through inspiration to get the right outcome. So, that campaign ran for the next 15 years, was probably the most awarded campaign in the company's history. And the way I did the job was I ran Australia, and then I go, now it's 5 o'clock. I start connecting with other markets.